Welcome to Halls on Film. My name's Sheldon Hall.
And my name is Christopher Hall.
And today we're going to be reviewing two films. A Day at the Beach, directed by Szymon Hezera and written by Roman Polanski.
And The Fifth Horseman is Fear, directed by Zbynek Brynych.
Well done on getting that pronunciation in right at the start.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's start with A Day at the Beach. This is a film that neither of us had seen, and in fact has been extremely difficult to see for many years. Made in 1969, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 1970, and then subsequently disappeared in most regions of the world. Apparently it had a brief and belated release in the late 70s in France, but was shelved in Britain and America and everywhere else, apparently, for many years, until a print, or the negative, was rediscovered in Paramount's London vaults in 1993 by its director. And
then also, during that period, apocryphally, the director says somebody labelled the film print wrong.
Allegedly, yes, there'd been some mistake in paperwork or filing or something of the sort, which had led to the film being mislaid. But the film was originally shelved because Paramount thought it was unreleasable, and we'll say what we think of ourselves of that notion a bit later. Just to explain what it's about, the film is adapted from a Dutch novel, and the names have been anglicised, but the film was shot in Denmark in English. The principal actors are British. Mark Byrne plays the lead role, and most of the supporting cast is Danish or otherwise European, some of whom will have been dubbed, no doubt, by other voices. It concerns a young man who seems to be a poet, who visits his ex-partner and takes her daughter, who may or may not be his daughter, for a day at the beach on a very rainy day. And the child, played by the young Beatrice Beatty Edney, who later became an adult actor, is accompanied on this sort of odyssey by her uncle Bernie, who proceeds to, we assume, drink himself to death throughout the day. So the narrative follows a series of encounters with various people in bars on the seafront, and ends with, this is probably a spoiler, so you can skip over this bit if you like, ends with Bernie's collapse and his and the young girl's inability to wake him up. So he may or may not have died. There is an interview with one of the other actors, Fiona Lewis, on the disc, in which she claims that a subsequent scene was shot in which he eventually returns the child home. So presumably in the original conception, he was in fact still alive. But the film is ambiguous at this point, so it allows us to speculate on the possibility of him having drunk himself to death. It is one of those, as the very informative booklet essay describes, it is one of a small number of films about the poet drunk figure who is kind of obsessively self-destructive, railing against the hypocrisies of the world, while treating all around him with contempt and eventually, ensuring his own destruction, either literal or metaphorical. And the film depends to a great deal on whether or not, even if you don't find him sympathetic, whether or not you find this figure interesting. My problem with it, and I'm perfectly willing to admit this is a limitation of myself as a viewer, I tend to find films about addicts very difficult to engage with. This may be just my own intolerance, but I tend to find characters who are incapable of self-control in some way or another quite tiresome, and particularly in a case of a film like this, or a character like this, who seems monumentally self-indulgent and self-regarding.
Yeah.
And I found, although Mark Burns gives as good a performance as could be expected of him, apparently Polanski, the screenwriter and co-producer, felt he'd been miscast, but to give him his due, Burns makes as much of the character as he can do. I'm not sure that even another actor would have made the character more sympathetic than I find him. What did you think, Chris?
I agree with everything you said.
Well, that's no good.
No, okay. Yeah, I agree with everything you said, but with caveats.
Okay.
The Mark Burns character is, you're absolutely right, he's the drunk poet. Culturally, it's at a time when a lot of people were losing faith with the counterculture of the 60s, which is absolutely understandable because they were basically waking up with a massive hangover. And that is alluded to somewhat. He's completely misanthropic. You understand why his ex-partner would no longer want to be with him. He tends to dislike everybody he meets. Half of them, though, he does tap for free drinks.
Yes.
So there is that. It is difficult to like him as a character. It's difficult to feel sympathy for him. That isn't the fault of Mark Burns. I don't think that's the fault of the script. It's just the way it is. It's a story of the destruction of one man on a day at the beach. There was a few things that I was thinking about when I was watching it about why don't I like this person? And that got me thinking about similar characters. And obviously the one that, because of my generation, the one that popped into my head was obviously Withnail and I.
Uh-huh.
I want to acknowledge Mark Burns gives this performance 100%. I don't know if they are prop drinks. I suspect they aren't, because in other ways it is an incredibly low budget film.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, it's not that lower budget. I mean, according to the information in the booklet, it cost $3 million, and it does not look it.
Wow.
I can only assume that went on location expenses, because it was shot in Denmark primarily, apparently, because the licensing arrangements allowed an all-day drinking session, which was not the case in Britain, where, of course, Polanski was based in the 1960s.
Yeah. Okay, stand corrected. So they may or may not be prop drinks, but
they look real beer.
They look like real beer. And I was thinking, wow, that in the mid-90s, there was a drinking game that I was aware of, which was Drink Along with Withnail.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And I thought, wow, if people knew this film existed in the mid-90s, there'd be a lot more middle-aged men with liver problems in the film community, because he puts away a lot of drink, whether it's prop drink or real drink. It looks absolutely authentic. So he gives it his all. You like Withnail because he's witty. There's a surreal element to it. He's also got a straight man to bounce off. The script, I think, in Withnail is better than the script in this one. I was also thinking
it's funny in Withnail, which is not the case.
It's not in this. This has got a Scandi Eastern European seriousness to it, which is great. But it doesn't work with the English language characters. The other character I thought of again is the David Thewlis character in Naked, which again I didn't particularly like that character in Naked, but the force of David Thewlis's performance carries that through, and he's almost a force of nature. You just can't stop him. He just carries on. This, with his self-pitying and his, as I said before, with his misanthropy and the neglect of this girl who may or may not be his daughter, makes it very, very difficult to like him.
I don't think you need to like a character so much as be able to engage with them.
Yes.
I think even if you find a character unsympathetic, as long as there's some kind of level of interest in the characterization itself, or in the actions of that character or in their surroundings, I think you will go along with the film and go along with the character simply to see what happens to them. There are plenty of movies about unsympathetic characters that are nevertheless rewarding to watch. I find it difficult to see anything redeeming about this character in that respect, and one ends up sympathising with all of the people who have to put up with him and provide him with the drinks. There is one sequence which I suppose gave the film a certain amount of notoriety, which involves a guest appearance by Peter Sellers and his regular companion Graham Stark. They play a pair of gay shopkeepers, and in a scene apparently adapted directly from the source novel, and inevitably, I suppose, this is a film made in 1969, the characterizations, the performances are, shall we say, of their era in their rather embarrassingly homophobic representation of a camp gay couple. The presence of Sellers' name was one of the few things that might have given the film some kind of commercial credibility.
Yeah.
But it's too small a role, really, to have given the film that degree of prominence. One can understand, therefore, why Paramount, having looked at it, decided that there was no point in trying to release it. One of the things that's interesting about the 1960s and 1970s as an extended era is the number of films that were shelved in that period. Obviously this is the post-New Wave era. Multiple new waves in the 1960s and 1970s, which resulted in a lot of breaking of conventions in the way films were made and the kinds of stories they were told and so forth. One of the consequences of that seems to have been that a great many films simply were almost perversely uncommercial and were being aimed at who exactly? So it's thinking about who the audience for this film is. It's very difficult to imagine people wanting to pay to see it on any significant scale. For a film costing $3 million, it does not look it. It's quite understandable to assume that it's a low-budget film because it is largely consists of a rather bedraggled pair of people trudging through the rain, apparently rain that had to be artificially generated. Presumably there were a lot of fire trucks on set in order to provide the rain, because apparently it was very sunny. You can't actually tell that from the film when they were shooting this in the summer of '69. So it's difficult to see where the money went. Other than that,
because they don't bother replacing the Danish road signs or the Danish signage in the bars or anything like that.
My assumption is that it's meant to be in Denmark, but it's very culturally non-specific in that sense.
Yeah.
Of course, the character, Bernie, has this kind of high-flown rhetorical, orotund, verbal style, which you either find engaging or not. Or,
you're being very polite there.
Very difficult.
The word I wrote was pretentious.
That came to mind.
They must have spent that $3 million on the rain machines, because at some point that rain is absolutely, it's beyond torrential.
And yet he never seems to get any wetter.
No, and he's not really wearing a raincoat. He's wearing a leather jacket and a wool jumper, pair of brown cords. So going back to the Peter Sellers cameo, it's completely different from all of the other scenes. You don't know where it is in relation to the beach, which they spend a lot of time on. The staging of it is different. It's almost like it's directed by a different person. Because they want to get as many close-ups of Peter Sellers as possible, and then he buys a replacement shell to replace the one that the little girl has lost, which is really the only act of kindness we see him do with this girl, and then it's never mentioned again. There's no plot reason for it to be there at all. There is, at least for earlier encounters, so you understand a bit more about his character, his motivation, some of his background. But with that put in there, it's a very odd scene for that.
Worth saying that the film is directed by Simon Hézerer, who is French-Moroccan by birth, and this is his only fiction feature. We should say also that the film is available on the Powerhouse Indicator label. It is as well presented, like all Indicators releases, as well presented as it could have been. There are two versions of the film. One is the newly restored scan from the original negative. The other is a full-frame transfer in standard definition of a slightly longer version of the film. The only difference appears to be an early sequence just after the opening titles, in which we get to see the young girl's father in a short exchange of dialogue for a couple of minutes. I think the thing most worthwhile, if you're not enamoured of the film, as clearly we aren't, on the disc is an excellent feature-length documentary on an interview with the film's co-producer, Gene Gutowski, who had produced Polanski's previous films in Britain, Repulsion, Cul-de-sac, and The Fearless Vampire Killers, aka Dance of the Vampires. and who talks about at length about his experience of surviving as a Jew in Nazi-occupied Poland, and the means by which he, apparently uniquely of his family, was able to survive the Holocaust and emerge from that period. A fascinating narrative, which in many ways parallels Polanski's own story, and which I found far more stimulating, more interesting than the feature film itself.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I'm not on a downer all the way about the film. I love the fact that the rain is absolutely persistent for the first third of the film. And again, I admired the two main actors for being so wet and continuing to act. That does present a big problem for the sound department, in that almost all of the dialogue in the first half of the film is ADR'd. It's not a great mix.
Yeah.
And that is a further obstacle for full engagement, for immersive engagement, because you're very aware that voice isn't coming out of that mouth because of the acoustics of whatever environment they're in. And what I noticed really early on is that they're using non-diegetic sounds in a really interesting way. There's a bit after he's had his milk, which is his breakfast, at his ex-partner's place. He downs 2 double vodkas, and as he downs 2 double vodkas, a plane goes overhead in the apartment. You don't see the plane, so they're looking for opportunities to use sound in a creative way, which is really admirable in this film, which is very, very dialogue heavy and driven by his self-destructiveness. And a lot of the time when they're on the beach, there is a foghorn sounding like an alarm all the way through. It gets a bit sunny later, so the foghorn isn't being sounded. I was looking at the credits at the end just to see if I, because I'm a nerd, see if I recognised any of the sound design or the sound mixing team. I didn't, but I think they deserve a lot of respect for the work that they did on it. That said, in one of the early scenes, this is again why I struggled to think $3 million. What did they spend that on? In the flat, which doesn't feel like a set, it feels like a location flat. You can clearly see the shadow of the boom operator on the wall as they go into the kitchen,
I missed.
Which I had to rewind back just to see if if it was a shadow of a plant or something. No, that's a person holding a boom pole, which is the kind of thing you'd expect somebody to go, oh no, there was a shadow, can we do that again? But clearly they didn't have the time or the energy. Very, very interestingly, shot by Gilbert Taylor.
Yes, there's a brief BBC documentary, 12-minute episode of the Behind the Camera series that appears on the disc, in which he doesn't, in fact, talk about this film at all, but he does talk about lighting Polanski's Repulsion, which is his favourite of his own work, apparently.
In the early scenes where he's going into his ex-partner's flat and leaving, what they do is whenever he's pressing a button for the lift or opening a door, they'll cut to almost an extreme close-up of that happening, and it builds up the tension in a way which I don't know whether Martin Scorsese has ever seen this film. I can't remember him ever mentioning it, but he uses a similar technique in After Hours to build up the tension, particularly at the beginning where Griffin Dunne is trying to get into the flat of Rosanna Arquette. It will have a really brief, extreme cutaway of a light switch going on or a door opening or the door handle opening to build up the tension and to build up the anxiety in the audience. Okay, so... Oh! No, I don't want to mention everything.
No, go on, what?
Well, there's a couple of moments where at least 2 of the actors, very, very quickly, this again makes me question, what did you spend the money on? Very, very quickly just look straight down the lens as if they're looking for somebody to go, cut.
Right.
And I'm like, Gordon Bennett. How did they let that through? It's another reason why you can sympathise with the fact that somebody went, we're not going to release this. it's not a lost diamond, is it? It's a
No.
It's almost a curate's egg.
Yes, I think that's a fair summary.
Or a film for Polanski completists, or Peter Sellers completists, if there are such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's far from the worst of Sellers films from this period.
That's very true.
So, yes, if you have any curiosity about seeing another lost performance of Sellers, then it's worth seeing. And simply as, one of those lost movies of the period, of which there are many. It's worth digging out in that respect.
Yeah. Okay, so that takes us on to The Fifth Horseman is Fear by Zbynek Brynych. Part of the Czech New Wave. It's on second run, as ever. I really, really, really like this film. It's, as with a lot of Czech New Wave films, it's an adaptation of a novel. Similar to Day at the Beach, its geographical setting and its time setting is deliberately ambiguous. The novel is based in Nazi Germany, but it was felt that during the adaptation process that they should keep that part of it ambiguous so that they could comment on the contemporaneous setting in Czechoslovakia in the mid-60s, which makes you question what the hell is going on occasionally through contemporary eyes. But for me, it made it a very kind of unsettling watch in a good way. It's about a doctor who, through no fault of his own, has got to find some morphine, and he travels through different levels of society trying to find a shot of morphine for a resistance fighter who he's had to deal with and get some morphine for. It had a slightly troubled release because he wanted it to have an international release. It was taken up by an Italian distributor, Carlo Ponti, who said, yes, I can release this in the West as long as you give me some titillation. So a few years later, they filmed another scene set in a Nazi brothel, which does include, as you can imagine, titillation, but is still a very disturbing scene. There's an SD version of that on the disc because they are unable to trace even a positive film print version of that to get a good scan of it.
Yes, it's transferred from a VHS release from the late 80s, I think it is.
Yeah. So it's interesting from that perspective. What did you think of The Fifth Horseman is Fear?
Well, I mean, picking up on the point you made about the non-specific background detail, so that the film exists in its own reality rather than as being a historically faithful representation of the Nazi occupation. The additional scene that you mentioned is in fact the only one where you see Nazi uniforms. That's one reason why it doesn't fit in with the rest of the film, is that the only point where we have an unmistakable visual evidence this set during World War II is in that additional scene that was not an integral part of the movie. And giving the legitimate cut of the film, as it were, that degree of abstraction is not only a way of making it applicable in an allegorical way to the geographical, national, temporal present of the 1960s, it's also a way of giving a kind of an abstracted Kafkaesque quality, so that it exists in a sort of non-specific world, rather like Orson Welles' version of The Trial from a few years earlier. It exists in a kind of nightmare world which could be anywhere, could be at any time. And it's actually quite, I mean, I did have to stop the film at one point to double-check the synopsis in the accompanying booklet, or the blurb on the back of the DVD, to check where and when it was set, just to be sure that I'd figured it out correctly, as I had. And to remind myself of, the general outline of the plot. It's one of those films, I think, that will benefit from multiple viewings as you become more adjusted to what each sequence is doing and the relationship between the characters and the subtext of the various encounters.
One of the reasons I think I really enjoyed this film was a lot of the quite startling cinematography.
Yes.
He lives in an apartment building, and every so often there'll be lots of people on the stairs looking down to see what the noise is, and there'll be almost, you mentioned Orson Welles, it's almost a Wellesian shot looking up the stairwell.
And that setting is itself a
like
kind
that.
of abstraction from outside reality. So it becomes a sort of nightmare world, self-enclosed, semi-abstract because of the design of the building in itself.
Yeah, and the sound design adds to that as well. The whispering is heightened in it as well, isn't there?
And fragmentary types of music, dissonant pieces of music.
Yes. Yeah. That was another reason, particularly at the beginning. The fragmentary music was another really startling part of the film.
Beautifully shot in CinemaScope black and white, worth saying.
Yeah.
Not a film that's been widely seen in the West. This, as far as I'm aware, this film didn't get a theatrical release in the UK. Certainly hasn't been seen on British television. In fact, the director's work has rarely been seen on British television. Only one other of his films was shown in the World Cinema Strand on BBC Two in the 1960s. Besides that, his films have been difficult to see in this country.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Okay.
Did you know of this film before we decided to review it?
That's a good question. I knew of the title because I've spent a while now delving into the Czech New Wave, so I knew of the title. I didn't know what it was about. I wanted to watch it a second time in preparation for today, but I didn't get around to it.
Right.
But I think it's a remarkable piece of work.
The other link between not the film so much as these two Blu-ray editions is with that documentary I mentioned about Gina Gutowski on the Blu-ray of A Day at the Beach, which has more in common with this feature film than does the main feature of Day at the Beach. So that experience of living under Nazi oppression and occupation, and the kind of paranoia that results from that, and the desperate struggle for survival, to remain invisible, to escape these kind of surveillance operations conducted by the authorities, and preserve not just your life but some degree of self-respect and integrity is that's a commonality between those two features.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. In that way, it's got similarities to Weak Spot, isn't it?
I guess so. I hadn't thought of that either.
Because that's
the film that we discussed several episodes ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would definitely watch Fifth Horseman is Fear again. Probably less so A Day at the Beach. What about you?
Yes, likewise. I would like to revisit Fifth Horseman, and it's not a film I would. Let me say this: it's not a film I would choose to watch for entertainment.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I can see that. See, I think I would probably find a second viewing more entertaining.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Although, as a subject of entertainment, it's not something that I would immediately choose to relax with.
It's when it's when you know what's going to happen.
Yes, quite. Yeah, you're not struggling to figure out the connections.
And you're into the rhythm of the film a bit more, and you pick up on all of the bits that you embed as a filmmaker.
Whereas we both felt, I think, that Mark Byrne's character in A Day at the Beach is just too insufferable to sit through again.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you for listening. I've been Sheldon Hall.
And I've been Christopher Hall.
And we hope to see you again soon.
And in the next episode, we hope to be reviewing Nosferatu the Vampire and Notti Bianchi.